We are limping into 2023. I don't want to go into specifics. It's time for the professors and Marianne. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Pele, the great Brazilian soccer star who even I knew about. We're going to be talking about the situation in Ukraine, the $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that President Biden signed into law this week. We're going to be talking about Governor Rick Snyder, the tale of two governors from Michigan, Rick Snyder and Gretchen Whitmer. One of them should be going to prison. Neither one of them is going to prison. And some other things with the professors and Marianne. We'll also be giving you ASMR for the eyeballs with Joe in Norway. Joe in Norway, you have a freshly seasoned wok. What are you preparing for us?
Indeed. I have a couple hungry belly night owls here. I'm gonna make them some fried ramen noodles with the tofu, the paprika, shallots, mushrooms. I've also got some eggplant that I'm roasting. And then I'll make a quick pickle out of these cucumbers for tomorrow.
Okay. And so
Sound good?
we'll come back to you. We will, this is torture. And if you have extra cash, everybody should go to rahima.org, RAHIMA.org. We still haven't accepted the refugees from Afghanistan, as I understand it. We create a lot of refugees here in this country. There are some who do make it here to America. Rahima.org is a great organization. It's a food pantry in the Bay Area. Go to rahima.org, take a look at the types of food they provide to families, and open up your wallet and give to rahima.org. It's vetted by Professor Adnan Hussein. How did you discover rahima.org, Professor Adnan Hussein?
Well, I didn't really discover it. It was a part of my life because my parents established it when I was, I guess, a college student, maybe late high school, I forget. It was about 30 years ago in our garage. And when they discovered, particularly my mom, that there were a large number of Afghan refugees, Bosnian and Somali refugees coming to the Bay Area, my mom started organizing a way to provide food, clothing, and other assistance that was needed to get them on their feet and established in their new home. And it grew from there. And now, feeds and supports well over 500 families a month and works with other food banks and charitable organizations. And they're still doing it. They went today for 4 hours and worked at Rahima, signing up renewals for people who want to continue to receive assistance on a regular monthly basis in 2023. And of course, there are no end of people who are in need, especially with inflation and all the economic hardships, but also the world's refugees. The Bay Area is extremely expensive place to live, and people need support. So do be generous if you can. Help out these efforts to keep families afloat.
Yes. Go to rahima.org, RAHIMA, rahima.org. Take a look at the food that they give out. If you think your money could be better spent, I defy you to find a charity that will spend your money better, because it's the basics. It's beans, it's yogurt, it's all healthy, mostly vegetarian, right? Borderline vegan food. You get a pound of beans, it goes a long way. And anyway, so if the best way to thank everyone for this show is to go to rahima.org, RAHIMA.org, and give what you can. Professor Marianne Cummings is a particle physicist with the Fermi Lab. What she's doing here, I have no idea. Did you see Lane's drawing the other night, by the way?
The winter scene?
Oh my God.
That was gorgeous.
I saw that you commented on it. Anyway, you are also Parks Commissioner
Mhm.
for Aurora, Illinois, originally from Michigan. Tell us the tale of two governors. There's Gretchen Whitmer, the Democrat who just got
Mhm.
reelected. And then there's the Republican Rick Snyder, who killed a lot of children in Flint, Michigan. Is that correct? He basically murdered children and
No, that wasn't children, but there were a couple dozen people died of Legionnaire's disease, which they believe was instigated from water from the pipe. Okay, well, basically, it's
I mean,
it's
lead
a long
poisoning,
story.
lead poisoning is permanent.
Yes, but the children are permanently affected by the lead that was in the lead was in the water. Why was lead in the water? Because years ago, the emergency manager convinced Flint City Council that they could save money by switching the water source from the Detroit Water Authority. It's got a different name now, but it was basically lake water, to another source that was basically Flint River water. Now, the chemistry of river water is much different than the chemistry of lake water, and therefore was more corrosive on the pipes. And some of the older pipes, there's a there's a layer of protection between the old lead and the water that flows through, and that got eaten away. There was lead started showing up in the drinking water of homes in Flint. Children started showing signs of developmental arrest. I think it was University of Virginia people came down and did a systematic study and were alarmed by the state of affairs. Turns out every point of the way in terms of switching a water source from one water source to another, there's a whole series of regulations that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do testing. You're supposed to do a huge chemical assay. You're supposed to, I believe through the Michigan Environmental Protection Agency, do an assessment. And it turns out none of this was done. It was literally a wait and see. I am just really breezing over the details of this, but the bottom line was there was an investigation, and it started with when Rick Snyder was still governor, with his Republican attorney general started investigating the root of this crisis and how it got so bad and how it wasn't caught. They had a credible prosecution worked up at the time, by the end of Rick Snyder's tenure, that they were either indicted or were about to indict 4 members of his administration, high-level members, plus, which would have undoubtedly led to Rick Snyder himself. The new governor gets in, and her attorney general, I think her name is Dana Nessel, one of the first things she did was vacate all of the cases against these 4, claiming there was some excuse. There was, well, we feel this is weak. We feel we could make a much stronger case. And people were actually astonished, because there were a lot of work that it might have been a Republican AG, but they were still career prosecutors. And they said, well, if you think it's weak, you can always add on charges. Plus, you could always bring in, federal charges, because this basically falls under the purview of the Clean Water Act. So the long and short of it was, they said they were going to build up a case. They didn't. They seemed to not act on it for a long time. They did bring cases against these 4, plus Rick Snyder. And the way they did it, and I can't remember the details, but apparently they went through like a 1-judge grand jury. They went through a legal process that was almost guaranteed that it would be overturned by the Supreme Court. And it was overturned by the Michigan Supreme Court earlier this year. And just this last week, the last of the charges that were done in, I think it was a circuit court, they were thrown out based on the earlier Supreme Court ruling. It's almost like these guys set the whole thing up to fail to protect the former governor, which wouldn't be a surprise. Many of Rick Snyder's campaign contributors were also Gretchen Whitmer's campaign contributors. I mean,
we have limited time here. So
Okay.
talk to me about Gretchen Whitmer, the current Democratic governor. We were led to believe, was it 2 years ago, that there was
I think that was, yeah.
in the lead up to the presidential election, that militia members out of Michigan conspired to kidnap the governor of Michigan. You
Yeah.
came on the show and disabused us of this notion, as did
Well, a
Collins.
lot of us believed at first. I mean, I was a little concerned because we're talking, these guys were members of the Wolverine Watchmen. There was a branch of the Michigan militia. Michigan militia made the news because, a very tangential member was Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Murrow building.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's how they got into the news. But, as I said, a former mother-in-law of mine, my boyfriend's old boyfriend's mother, was a member of the Michigan militia, a very continental woman who happened to be a sharpshooter. And she kept bitterly complaining to me about what idiots they all were. I said, yeah. So when I heard that there was a coordinated plot to kidnap the governor, I'm going, whoa, things may have evolved in the last 20 years. And then, so it seemed like a slam dunk case, but I started reading, some of the statements of the defense attorneys, and a much different narrative emerged. The FBI, according to defense filings at the time, deployed at least 12 informants as well as several undercover agents. There was essentially there was never any plan. There was no agreement. And of course, there wasn't a kidnapping, but they induced a lot of people to say incriminating things to get ideas in their head. Specifically, Barry Croft, who they described as the ringleader, even though it was the FBI guy who was doing a lot of the coordinating on Facebook and so on and so forth. A man that even the prosecutors admitted was a misfit, outsider, and had mental health issues stemming from childhood. So you have a mentally ill guy who is being kind of goaded and encouraged, with his delusional fantasies of sparking a revolution. The other guy that got sentenced, so he got sentenced to like 19 and a half years. The other conspirator, and by the way, originally there were 13. They had to let over half of them go. There were 3 they got on lesser charges. They ended up with 4 going to trial. 2 of them decided to plead and be witnesses for the prosecution, and which left, and there was a trial earlier this year, and they were cleared on a couple of counts, and I think there was a couple of counts where there was just a hung jury, and they were retried. And this time they were found guilty, but of much lesser charges, and got the maximal. They were not convicted on kidnapping and terrorism, which was the original story. Now I'm reading this, so okay, the guy that was the ringleader got the maximal number of years. They wanted
Wait, the FBI agent?
life.
When you say ringleader, the FBI
The
agent?
guy who was the guy who basically claimed to, be plotting to kidnap had a plan to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, and got a lot of other people at the prodding of all these FBI guys.
Right.
Which even people admitted that, yeah, these people on their own, this guy on his own would have never done anything. He really wasn't capable. But the other thing that was a little more disturbing was an admission from the his co-conspirator, as it were, this Adam Fox, was sentenced to 16 years. And the prosecutor there, Niels Kessel, had was very, Kestner, excuse me, was not happy with that. And he warned, this guy is going to come out a much more hardened, like radical than when he came into prison. And I'm going, no shit. Because you've effectively created a terrorist situation, a possible kidnapping. So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, if I'm the governor of Michigan, this is not making me feel safe. You're kind of goading on a lot of people, one of them clearly mentally ill and delusional, to think about kidnapping the governor. What happens if he goes rogue? If he just decides, I'm not waiting for my other life, let's just go ahead and kill her or something. I mean, now something did cross my mind at that point. I thought, well, Whitmer is a very well-behaved neoliberal. I mean, she's clearly on the side of the corporations. She's covering for the former governor. She's even properly racist in the sense that, she's never going to say a racist thing, but she did make public comments about how people were really tired about hearing about Flint. We have Flint fatigue,
Really?
Nobody wants, yes. People were critical of her, like, oh, yeah, well, maybe the people in Flint are a little tired themselves of, the water situation never getting fixed. But, when we were talking about Lee Harvey Oswald last week or a couple of weeks ago, and how, the CIA, he had met with the CIA and these guys knew about him, and going, wow, wait a minute. One of the functions of these sting operations, not only to keep budgets going to counter terrorism, but what happens if there is a governor who is very charismatic, a real leader, and is successfully doing something like, seeing to it that their state goes single payer, or something that, disturbs the power structure, that they might be a possible presidential material later on to become a real Bernie Sanders type. So you have these sting operations going on, and instead of arresting people before they even move to, implement the plot, you wait until they do something.
Well, we saw that.
think-
We have to move on. I think.
But anyway, that's my thoughts.
I think we saw that in Peru with Castillo. I think you had a leftist president in Peru who, the minute he was in office, there was one sting operation after another. Let's go to Professor Ann Lee. Thank you for that. You write a nightly update on the war in Ukraine over at the Daily Kos. Everybody should read Professor Ann Lee. Her handle is Annie Lee over at Daily Kos. Tell us what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, it began this morning with 120 missiles launched against Ukraine. Fortunately, they estimate about 50% of them got shot down. Just some spectacular video. You can see some of the air defense knocking down a cruise missile. That's coming out tonight. It's pretty much the same. The battle line is essentially frozen across the eastern and southeastern side, and there are a lot of peripheral stories. Most of them are kind of interesting pieces of disinformation. There's some pressure to negotiate ceasefires, but now that we've seen the presentation of both sides' position, they're essentially the same. Russia simply wants Ukraine to capitulate, and Ukraine wants Russia to leave all the way up to the pre-2014 borders. Essentially, that's what it's come down to. And the side stories perhaps are more interesting relative to the Wagner Group doing all kinds of very strange things and functioning much like a punishment battalion from World War II, from the Soviet period, forcing conscripts to go clear minefields, a variety of other things, threatening to shoot people who desert, etc. The peripheral stories are getting a little weirder. Female prisoners in Russia are now being recruited to be conscripted, which is interesting, but that's a very small number relative to the operation, the larger scale operation. The Russians claim that they have 300,000 troops ready to go. They've waved their arms about maybe invading from Belarus, but the analysts, the dominant analysts, say that that's probably not going to happen. And most of these are sort of empty threats. Most everything is essentially being waged at a very sort of meta level. That is, the 120 missiles that were sent are a reaction to 5 Tu-95 bombers being damaged on a Russian airstrip, and it's about 70 kilometers behind the Russian the battle line, the Russian border, and it made the Russians so concerned that they moved a significant number of bombers way far away. So it had an effect. The Russian official position was that nobody got, or only a few people got hurt, and nothing was damaged. Well, there's video of explosions in the distance, etc. So all that's kind of weird. A slight possible run on cash at Russian ATM, and the usual waving of arms of trying to transfer military equipment from various Western parties, including the United States, to Ukraine. The current one is to suggest that, and if you remember the history of military procurement, the Bradley fighting vehicle is a kind of weird boondoggle. It originally was supposed to replace a armored personnel carrier, but some members of the military wanted it to be a tank. Others wanted it to be more amphibious, and it's really a classic example of sort of overbuilding. Anyway, there are 6,000 of them in the US inventory, and there's talk, this is another trial balloon, I assume, of transferring them to the Ukrainians. Now, the issue, of course, and aside from all the usual disinformation, the current framing of it is that it's quote unquote a light tank. It really isn't, and its performance, with all due respect, in the Iraqi war was somewhat questionable. But even with that, there is in military procurement, and it is an $858 billion defense budget now, is to actually, there are openings for proposals for a new replacement for the Bradley fighting vehicle. So in effect, this is simply more of the same kind of procurement and expanding the military industrial complex by essentially providing more business for the large scale pork and boondoggles and all of the things that are part of the U.S. military. So on the one hand, it seems patriotic and altruistic. On the one hand, on the other hand, it's about cash. So it's that, and that's sort of what's going on now. Many people are being killed. The Russians have been losing somewhere between 400 to 600 troops a day over the last week or so. It is actually a pretty awful bit of action that's going on a battle line that hasn't really changed much of from a few kilometers backwards and forwards, and it's very hard to spin that one way or the other. A major counteroffensive is going to come, but it's more likely going to come similarly to the origin of the war itself. That is, they're waiting for the ground to be hard enough to actually invade. So that's the current thing, other than usual proclamations of brutality, all of the usual horrible stories. not enough coverage of them. We have very little coverage of the filtration camps on the Russian side. There's tremendous claims now about how many Ukrainians have actually gotten killed in combat, and that has yet to be actually shown, because the official Ukrainian version is that only 13,000 Ukrainian troops have died, when it's probably a lot more than that. On the other hand, since we last talked, it's over 100,000 Russian troops have been killed, supposedly. We really don't know what the real numbers are. Although there is actually a project that has been tracking down death, reporting of death certificates and burials, and the numbers are quite different from the actual claims on both sides by the ministries of defense. So it is a kind of an open question on that relative to the war. And if there's any peace talks that are going to happen, they're not going to happen until the spring.
Not till spring. Every war in my lifetime was going to be over in a couple of weeks. Just like World War I, right? That's kind of part of my lifetime. It will be over. It's going to be a quick, sweet little war. The first war in the Gulf was a sweet, short little war that never ended. We had to go back in 2003. There's no such thing as a splendid little war, I think, is what Teddy Roosevelt called the Spanish-American War, which never ended. I mean, we never learn about what we did in the Philippines to the indigenous people, the 500,000 we exterminated for years after that splendid little war came to an end. Professor Adnan Hussain, do you want to talk about this resort where Russians and Ukrainians are vacationing together?
Okay, well, I guess one of the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war that Anne was just talking about is that you have millions of refugees, as we know, mostly Ukrainians who have gone to places like Poland and so forth. But there are, of course, also Russians who have been leaving the country as a result of sanctions, as a result of the new military draft, the economic pressure, and so on. And many of them seem to have located themselves to Turkey, in particular to this southern coastal seaside resort, Antalya, which was popular with Russian tourists to begin with, and already had some who had relocated there as summer homes or year-round homes if they could manage it. But apparently Antalya has been inundated with foreign residents, including Ukrainians. So about 15,000 Ukrainians are in the city and about 50 to 60,000 Russians, all in the last year. This is new migration, you might say. So they've come, many of them fleeing war conditions or evading authorities, including Ukrainians evading the draft. The New York Times article did interview, one man with his daughter who was of military age, wouldn't give his name because, of course, it's illegal to leave Ukraine if you're a male of military age. It's not just Russians who are fleeing, being pressed into this war. And it's very interesting because there have been 19,000 sales of property in Antalya to foreigners, and most of these are these Russians and Ukrainians. And so local residents don't look at them really as refugees because they're buying property. Apparently, it's possible for them because of Turkey's fairly generous residency laws for them to gain legal residency and be residents. And so they don't think that after the end of this war, they're necessarily going to leave, and pointing out, why would you leave? I mean, Antalya is a gorgeous seaside resort with warm weather. If they've managed to spend 6 months or a year living in Turkey and supporting themselves, doing remote work or living off of previous resources, why would they relocate back to Russia? And even if they do go back to Russia or Ukraine, it's likely that they would spend significant parts of the year there, and it's changing the character of the city. Over 120,000 foreigners have moved there. There are whole districts of the city where you can hear Russian and Ukrainian. And in the old city, there is a historic Saint Alypios Orthodox church that is patronized. It seems about like 60% are Russian congregants and 35 or so percent are Ukrainians. So interestingly, one of the Turks who was interviewed, about this situation said that, look, all these Ukrainians and Russians are dancing together in the nightclubs and the cafes. This is a phony war. This is just political junk. Why are they, why is this war going on? I mean, these people, have so much in common, actually. I think there is some resentment in local residents, like we're going to see throughout Europe when economic pressure worsens the situation, that the Ukrainian refugees who were welcomed with open arms, in contrast to many of the refugees from the Middle East who were cause for panicked ideas of Eurabia being established, and that this being an invasion that was meant to overwhelm Europe. Nevertheless, there might be a more hostile reception if the economic situation in Europe worsens and projections of recession and high energy prices come to fruition. Although I noticed that energy prices, the natural gas futures in Europe, have dropped actually to below invasion levels.
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, there's a number of factors that are adduced to this. One, of course, finding other energy sources. Two, there has been some concerted attempt at reduction and economizing on use, but also it's been a warm fall, so the reserves will go further into the winter because they didn't use as much of the available supply in this warm fall. But of course, it could turn out to be a very severe winter. I think many of us in North America have, been experiencing, extreme sudden drops of temperature. So that's speculative. One other element that actually is an interesting underside of the story, I think, is that there are projections of less demand, partly because of recession. So the good news, the prices are low, but part of the reason the prices are low is because the economy is slowing down. There's much less energy demand because people are not producing as much. So much of the energy inputs, of course, go into production, economic activity. And so the good news may be the bad news that, energy is not so expensive, partly because, the economy is so weak.
Well, what is the story? The American economy is doing smashingly well, isn't it? Didn't we just have a new report that our GDP is over 3%, but Europe not so well, right?
That's right. Europe is paying the much larger economic and social price and social costs of this war because it's right on their doorstep. It also is affecting, their energy supply, trading partners. It obviously makes sense to trade locally. I mean, it costs you less to do business with, Russia for various goods that you need, like, natural gas and so on. And so, yeah, Europe, to import, and as also others are pointing out, deindustrialization. I mean, there's been a lot of relocation of production factories to other places, including the United States. And I think there's some resentment actually among the business community, or at least the policymakers who work on the economy, that the United States is actually profiting quite a bit from the sanctions and the war circumstances. And a place like Germany, that was the industrial heart of Europe, is finding real depleting and relocation of many of their companies' production facilities abroad.
I was reading that the EU initiated a windfall profit tax on America's own ExxonMobil,
That's right.
and ExxonMobil is challenging it, saying, well, if you tax us, if you take this money, we won't do any more investment in finding new oil. They
Mhm.
just spent something like how much on stock buybacks? 50 billion on. They're not looking for new oil, Exxon. They're
No, of course not. And this is really truly outrageous. It's really interesting to see the Europeans recognizing, how these, how much they are being targeted for even modest measures to control, these major US multinational, I mean, they're multinationals, but they're based in the US, companies. Because part of the approach with the windfall tax was to be able to then redistribute some of this to lower income families that would struggle with the high costs of living and high energy prices. Okay, but since that was anticipated that there would be, and there had been spikes, in the cost of energy earlier in the summer, last spring, and so on. So there, the oil company is contesting this European provision. And I don't think the Europeans are too pleased with, the benefits that are going to the United States, the behavior of these US multinationals. And perhaps that's one reason why you see some talk about negotiations that has been renewed. People will be getting tired of this situation, and also why Olaf Scholz, is the first Western leader to visit China since the pandemic was Olaf
he's the
Scholz.
socialist leader of Germany.
That's right. Yes. And I mean, I think what it's suggesting is that although most of Europe has fallen in lockstep with the US position, NATO's position against Russia, that they're not as comfortable following the US into the Cold War with China, and are concerned to keep some options open because their economies really do depend on trade with China. And maybe they will start acting a little bit more independently on security, trade, and military policy, at least when it comes to China. But it reminds me, one thing I did want to say very quickly about this. I'm wondering also if Anne had seen this. I mean, Ollie North was on Fox News. I happened to see this clip of him talking about.
It's excuse me, Colonel Oliver North.
Oh, that's right. I'm so sorry.
Let's call
That's
him.
right. The war criminal who actually should be behind bars, Colonel Oliver North.
Thank you.
Well, he was kind of pushing back against the rhetoric we heard about last week about how there are elements in the right wing that are critical of US policy and support for Ukraine for various reasons, whether it's polemical partisan politics or it's seeing Russia and Putin as emblems of, a kind of Christian Western civilizational alliance that needs to be established as a conservative political leader, whatever the case may be. That discourse does emerge and appear sometimes on the right in Fox News and on conservative media. And so he was pushing back against this question, or this idea that this is wasted money being sent to Ukraine. Why should we be sending money to Ukraine when we could use it here in this country? He said, well, look, all this money is coming back because it's going to production, it's employing Americans, good, honest, working class Americans, because they're employed in the arms industry. This is all coming back to America. So don't think of it as being sent to Ukraine. It's staying in the United States. What he didn't say is that it's mostly going for the profits of, this wealthy elite, but, they believe in trickle-down economics, and he's saying it trickles down to some Americans. And the second thing is he said, look, this is a tried and true tactic we have to, continue this because we have a kind of partnership that's working like it worked in Afghanistan and other places where the Ukrainians are willing to spill their blood using our bullets. So, this is a good, partnership. They're willing to fight on our behalf, using our weapons. And then thirdly, that we need to warn China. This goes well beyond just the theater of NATO versus, Russia. This is actually a warning sign geopolitically to China that they cannot, take Taiwan, and that there will be a heavy response. It's necessary for us to show this in this particular theater to communicate that message in the much bigger struggle that lies ahead against China. He just revealed all the logic of the American current geopolitical thinking, it seems to me.
Yeah. I remember in the spring of this year, Joe Biden went to Alabama to a Lockheed Martin weapons manufacturing plant and said, I'm here to show Americans they have skin in the game in Ukraine, that by making these missiles, you have skin in the game and we're creating jobs. And I thought, they're not even pretending anymore. It's just out in the open. This is about profit.
Well, did he get the workers there to decorate the missiles or whatever, they're making
Right.
with, anti-Putin messages and things
Right.
like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's turn to Professor Bick. Joe Biden, I believe, is he in the Virgin Islands? He's at some resort, some war profiteers mansion somewhere in the Caribbean, where they shipped the $1.7 trillion omnibus bill down to him for his signature.
Well, it's well deserved, David. He really delivered for the war profiteers.
Yes, he does.
Yeah, he's very effective in that. So last time I was here, I talked about the $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill for 2023. And I wanted to add some details and some perspective on where that money is going. And as you have just alluded, much of it is going to the military and to law enforcement. When it comes to spending on the military, it always seems to go up no matter which party is in control of our government. Obama's last military spending bill was $610 billion. Trump's final bill was $740 billion. That's an increase of a staggering $130 billion. And President Biden doesn't want to interrupt that record, so he proposed $753 billion for the military, and that's an increase of $12 billion over Trump's astronomical figure. So, and just to kind of put it in perspective, the CDC, their budget for a year is about equivalent to the increase in the military spending that from Trump to Biden. So, and Biden's also, what he's basically doing is taking the money that we're saving by not spending it on the Afghan war,
Same amount of money, same exact amount.
Yeah. He's spending that in Ukraine and building up American arms for use elsewhere. And the Democrats are claiming that the omnibus bill contains the highest level of non-defense funding ever. Well, now that's very interesting because in reality, you have to consider what they're counting as non-defense spending. And it includes the following: military aid programs sponsored by the State Department, nuclear weapons programs in the Department of Energy budget, recurring post-war expenses that go to veterans care and benefits, The non-defense spending also includes the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security, law enforcement and prison operations, and grants to state and local police. So in all, it's about 300 billion in military and law enforcement related spending, which is not defense spending, according to the Democrats. So in summary, well over 1 trillion of this $1.7 trillion bill is being spent on the military or law enforcement.
Including ICE.
Yes, so I'm going to get to all the different agencies that are included in this non-defense spending. You know, they might also call it the domestic spending. Well, you know, it's really not looking out for the people of this country when you're spending it on the Drug Enforcement Agency. But and this is consistent with the U.S. becoming a warfare state rather than a welfare state. You know, I think the responsibility of a nation is to provide for the welfare of its people. And the spending priorities of this omnibus bill, as long as many other spendings by the federal government, shows that this is really a secondary concern of the U.S. government, if that. Department of Homeland Security Title II provisions include Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Transportation Security Administration, Coast Guard, Secret Service, FEMA police grants, state and local law enforcement assistance and COPS programs, Bureau of Prisons, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, DEA, Marshals Service, FBI, Department of Justice National Security Division, Interagency Crime and Drug Enforcement, and the military aid portion of the additional Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2023, and Department of Defense and Bureau of Prisons spending on facilities, and State Department Title IV, which is international security assistance, as well as National Nuclear Security Administration spending. So that's our domestic spending. Dropped from the omnibus bill was the revival of an expanded monthly payment for families with children.
Why would we want to do that?
Yeah, just because, you know, that was effective in reducing child poverty in this country by 40%. So rather than go for 100% reduction, we're just going to eliminate the whole thing and let poverty go back to where it was for children. Yeah, it's really astonishing. And also there's nothing in it, or virtually nothing in it for you know, a new round of emergency pandemic aid. You know, as COVID is going up and other infections, flu and other respiratory infections are going up, and they're probably going to go up significantly after the holidays because of people getting together. But no, we're not going to spend on that. We're going to spend on all these other things.
Professor Hussein?
Well, I was just going to say, why don't those kids join the military? Then they could get all of the benefits that they need and have health care,
Unless,
you know, and get to go to college and, you know, all of these things. I mean, basically the last vestiges of any kind of welfare state resides, as I've said, I think several times before on this show, in the military. That's the last bastion of it. So you have to basically offer yourself up to the state to decide whether you live or die for its purposes in order to get any benefits to have a, you know, decent life for while you are alive and not sent off to war somewhere. It's frankly disgusting.
yes.
You know, that list that Prof. John read out, that's a disgusting portrayal of this country. The only thing that's functioning in the economy is the military sector. That's the part that gets all of the budget. And Chomsky called it military Keynesianism. And really, that's the story of post-World War II. Well, World War II and the transformation, post-World War II economy is really, what distinguishes the United States is its military spending, and those industries and ancillary services is really what's floating this economy.
And we don't win any wars for all that money. What did we win? Grenada, we won. Right?
Well, we
should.
saved the world, I think, once again.
Hey, the Cubans could be building airstrips in America right now if the Gipper didn't
Well,
go.
at least somebody would be building them. Maybe we need to bring in the Cubans for an infrastructure program. Cubans building airstrips somewhere, anywhere. Hey, how about South Florida?
And we could use the Cuban doctors as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Please continue. The omnibus bill.
So that's the main thing I wanted to say, just to call out the Democratic leadership once again for saying, wow, this is the biggest amount that we've ever spent on domestic spending. Really? Because we're looking at the priorities here, you're calling things that are military spending, not military spending, plus a whole bunch of things to really oppress the population. I mean, does anyone really think we need the DEA?
Well,
Has that been
or
a
ICE.
useful,
Or ICE.
or ICE, right? Have those agencies been really helpful to the democracy of this country? Putting all these people in jail.
They're sadistic, and that's important.
For some
It
people,
is,
it is.
Yeah. Okay.
On the other hand, the Fox Valley Park District is getting $4 million to fund a pedestrian and bicycle bridge over the Fox River,
That's good.
eliminating a major barrier to trail access.
Oh,
So there's that.
well, let's
I
end.
wonder if it's being built strong enough to transport military equipment over that major island.
Let's do this. Let's end on something upbeat. I'm going to ask for your favorite book, movie, TV show, and leader of the week. I can't tell you my favorite book, movie, or TV show or leader of the year, but I can tell you my favorite book, movie, TV show, and leader in the past week. So I'll go first. My favorite book, January 6th Report. Really great, really well written. My favorite movie, Flamingo Road, Joan Crawford, TCM. Best TV show, the David E. Kelly Anatomy of a Scandal. It was good eye candy. And my favorite leader is Cori Bush, Congresswoman from Missouri. If anybody would like to add to that, that's for this week, not the year. I can't think of.
My favorite leader of the week is Greta Thunberg, the still a teenager leader of the ecology movement, and really changed a lot of people's lives. Well, she also proved that she's pretty good at Twitter clapback, because she got attacked online by Andrew Tate. I don't even know who the hell Andrew Tate is.
How's Andrew Tate doing? How's he doing tonight?
I think they let him out of the clink, but they did arrest him.
Mhm.
Apparently Thunberg was responding to some dickish tweet where he said, well, I own a Bugatti and 2 Ferraris, and they just crank out a ton of pollution. And so you can, it was just usual bragging, and as they might say, a certain amount of phallus waving. And so she sent him an email back that Well, he said he invited her, please provide your email address so I can send a complete list of my car collection. He's got 33 of them and the respective enormous emissions. And so she sends back an email saying, oh, yes, please do enlighten me. Email me at smalldickenergy@getalife.com. And so he writes back saying, thank you for confirming via your email address that you have a small penis, Greta Thunberg. The world was curious, and I do agree that you should get a life. Now, the thing is, he included a photo of himself smoking a big cigar, and he had a pizza box in front of him. The pizza box was from a chain, a pizza chain in Bucharest. So he was in Romania. So the Romanian police had they suspect him of doing sex trafficking and rape along with his brother. And so by tracking that and in effect reading the QR code on the side, they arrested him. So he made a rebuttal video that doxed himself and got him arrested by Romanian authorities for sex trafficking. And so that just happened today. But
what is it
Twitter
with
has made a lot
pizza?
of fun of this.
What is it about pizza and Comet Pizza and QAnon and all that stuff? What is it?
Well, it's called Jerry's Pizza. So I don't know why you would use, maybe Jerry means something else in Romanian. I have no idea.
But is he out?
I think he's been detained for 24 hours.
All right. If anybody wants to add to best book of the week, best movie, best TV show, best leader.
Well, I would add, none of these are new. So since it's just the week, it's what I was maybe
I watch
dealing
Turner
with.
Classic Movies, so I mean,
Right. Okay. My guess I would say for a book, History of the World in 7 Cheap Things by Raj Patel and Jason Moore. Fantastic book. We'll be having an episode on it for Guerrilla History sometime in the new year. So look for that. TV show, I did have the opportunity to rewatch some episodes from Babylon Berlin, which is on Netflix. Amazing series. I just absolutely think it's one of the best things I've seen in years.
Babylon Berlin.
Babylon Berlin. It's set in, basically Weimar, late Weimar, Berlin, and involves a detective. It's a really interesting portrait of the intellectual, cultural, and political world in which fascism is starting to rise and emerge. Really great series.
Okay.
Leader of the week, Lula.
Yes.
Because he's appointed a new minister for a new ministry of Indigenous Affairs and an environmental minister who will hopefully rebuild that ministry that Bolsonaro destroyed and give the lungs of the world a chance to breathe, the Amazon.
Great. If anybody would like to add to that, we can go to Joe in Norway. You're torturing me, Joe. Last week was easy. You didn't make me hungry polishing your wok.
Made a little belated Christmas festive dish here. We've got grilled eggplant with tahini sauce, balsamic reduction, and pomegranate and mint. It's got all the nice colors, greens and browns and whatnot.
Excellent presentation.
And then I did a quick stir-fried noodles, ramen noodle dish with tofu, mushroom, celery.
Wow.
And then a quick pickle, the garlic and shallots.
Amazing. I'm looking at this food and I'm starving. And then I'm thinking, all I have to do is walk over into my kitchen, step over a couple of mice, and open the refrigerator and eat over the sink. There are people in America, Joe, who are starving. And give to rahima.org, RAHIMA, That is the official charity of, I don't know if that's the right word to use, the official food bank here. And the food you're looking at, a lot of bang for the buck. It's not that expensive and it goes a long way. And that's the kind of food they give out at rahima.org, beans and tofu and rice with fiber in it, and fruit. And you can get, you can feed a lot of people for not a lot of money if you hand out that type of food. So your money is well spent. If you give to rahima.org, rahima.org, send them whatever you can. It's been vetted by Professor Adnan Hussein. His parents set it up, and you know, if his parents, the people who gave us Professor Adnan Hussein, they you know they're doing something right. So give to rahima.org. Let's end this year by sending them money. We create a lot of refugees in this world. It's time to take them in and help them. Any final thoughts before?
Well, I was thinking about television. I'm a little behind on my television watching, but I do recommend Professor John's Star Trek on Saturdays during office hours. Have
Yes.
been enjoying that, in spite of Captain Kirk.
Office hours, Friday night, 8 p.m. And then it goes through till the afternoon where Professor John teaches The Twilight Zone Friday night, and Saturday he teaches Star Trek. And Professor Hussein?
Oh, just quickly, we didn't talk about Pele, and I don't want to do anything
right,
long,
right.
but just
Yeah.
to say that he was a global superstar, you know, one of the first real global celebrity athletes to captivate the world. He did it by playing in World Cups, particularly the first televised, globally televised by satellite color transmission. You know, a beautiful athletic Black man in this amazing canary yellow, framed with cobalt blue shorts. I mean, it was just a visually arresting image. And he's, you know, really important just as a major global Black athlete, the first really of his kind, and really maybe only eclipsed or matched by Muhammad Ali for you know, notoriety and being so beloved and adored globally. So he came from incredibly poor roots, shining shoes at age 7 in a slum in Brazil, was discovered for the footballing genius that he was, captivated the world on the global stage at the World Cup. We just had a World Cup happening in Qatar in 2022. 5 billion people watched it, and that's the kind of superstar that he was, and so he will be remembered and missed. He turned into a bit of a corporate pitchman, which maybe you can understand. He, you know, came from nothing, and he wanted to support his family and so on. But what I will remember is the beauty of his goals, and also the 5 years that he played in New York for the New York Cosmos, and really made, you know, soccer exciting and fun for this period in the 70s in the United States when I was a boy. It was amazing that Pele was on our television screens in the US.
Right. Great. Professor Adnan Hussein is chairman of the religion department at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. He is the co-host of Guerrilla History with the beloved Henry Huckamaki. Professor Ann Lee writes over at the Daily Kos. Read her every night, and that's when she puts out her Ukraine update. And but she writes about other things as well. She writes under the name Annie Lee. Follow Professor Marianne Cummings on Twitter at Razor Girl. And Professor Jonathan Bick will be teaching The Twilight Zone every Friday night at office hours, and the Star Trek on Saturday. And Professor Hussein's course on the Crusades is available for everybody. And it resumes on the 9th or the 8th.
7th, Saturday the 7th.
The best way to start your weekend is to sit in on Professor Hussein's class on the Crusades. It's just a great way to relax and learn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see everybody.
And thank you for a great year.